Welcome, everyone. I know people are joining the Zoom call. I'll give people a few seconds to join. I see the numbers of the participants are increasing. And so I'll wait just a few more seconds for everyone to join. I see the many familiar names are joining. Thank you for coming back every week. It's really great to continue to connect with all of you, and a special welcome to all new attendees. And we're happy that you're here. So as always, this is our weekly update. So we'll just take a few minutes to give you a very high level update and an overview of the trial for those of you who are new. And then we'll jump right into your questions. To start to explain the trial, we'll just play a very short video for 2 minutes to explain the basics of the trial, and then we'll provide updates.
Something new is here in the fight against ALS. The first ever ALS platform trial, designed to accelerate the development of effective and breakthrough treatments for people with ALS. So what's different about the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial? Instead of testing just one drug, the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial evaluates multiple treatments at the same time. This means more opportunities to find groundbreaking therapies in a faster time frame. Imagine having to build a new dock every time a different ship came to port with new treatment cargo. This is how traditional trials work. In platform trials, there is one dock to receive all the cargo and connect the treatments to their final destinations. Central infrastructure can be shared among therapies. And because different treatments are tested using a common master protocol, placebo data can be shared. In other words, patients have a far greater chance of receiving active treatment than in traditional trials. The HEALEY ALS Platform Trial will begin with 3 drugs selected by an expert evaluation committee. While therapy assignment to patients is random, each drug has an equal chance of success based on scientific evidence reviewed by the researchers. More drugs will be added soon. The trial will operate across a network of more than 50 coordinated sites nationwide, working as a team, increasing access for patients. More data, faster results, lower chance of placebo, breakthrough progress. ALS doesn't wait, and neither can we. The HEALEY ALS Platform Trial is enrolling now. We will continue to test new treatments. We will increase patient access to potentially life-changing therapies. We will drive the development of new biomarkers until we find a cure for all people with ALS.
So we launched this video last summer, and it's great to see that we have been making progress and adding new treatments to the platform trial. We launched in 2020 with 3 investigational products, Zellucoplan, Verdiperstat, and CNM-Au8, and we added Pridopidine in January. And if you can go to the next slide. As you may know, we recently achieved and actually surpassed 50% enrollment. So if you can go to the next one, we can see that now we are enrolling actively at 48 sites. We selected 54 sites initially. They're all approved by the central IRB, but some sites have been a little bit slower coming online. Many of them were really disrupted by COVID and the pandemic, but we're working again with all of them to bring all of them online soon. And we're also going to be adding sites very soon to the program to reach other geographies and increase capacity in cities that need that. Next slide. And these are the sites that are currently enrolling. The list is on our website, as well as the contact information. Since last week, when we met for this weekly update, we activated one more site, Neurology Associates in Nebraska. So welcome to that site. That's actually the second site in Nebraska. Next slide. And as I said earlier, we passed 50% enrollment in early March, so we continue to make progress. We expect the results of the first 3 regimens over the next few months. That's very important because we can only tell the results of each regimen when the regimen is completed. So not on an individual basis, but when the entire cohort completes. And so that's going to happen over the next few months. And it's great that basically in just over a year from launch, we can have results for the first 3 drugs. Normally, just by comparison, we would only see results perhaps for 1 drug a year. So it's really accelerating the pace. Next slide. And today we have on the line with us Catherine Small and Alison Bulat. They are available to take your questions. They, I know they connect with so many of you and answer phone calls and emails, and we're always in touch. So please, if we're gonna take as many questions as possible today, but if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to them. They can also help you navigate sort of the process and help you understand the criteria for the trial, the content and the process for the trial. We also have all our eligibility criteria online at the website that you can see on the slide. Next slide. And obviously we will continue to have these weekly webinars. They're all recorded, so please go on our website if you want to see the recordings. And I want to draw your attention to a series of webinars that was suggested by our patient advisors to really focus on the drug mechanism, of action and the science. So we had a scientific webinar series. Those are the dates and those are the website links to view the recording. So you can really learn from the companies and the scientists who are developing all of the products that we are testing in the trial. Again, they answered a lot of questions from the community, so feel free to refer to them. And actually, thanks to IMALS and some of our patient advisory committee members, we recently learned from the community what are the most pressing topics for the community, and we're working on organizing additional webinars to address the questions again that the people voted for, that they want us to cover during the weekly webinars. And with that, I stop, and I think we can take a few live questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, everybody, for joining. So, Sabrina, this one's for you. If you apply for the platform trial, do you choose which one you want, or are you matched with one of them?
So every participant who is eligible for the trial will be randomly assigned to any of the available treatment arms. So essentially right now it's 4. We started with 3 and we added number 4. So at this point, anyone who's enrolled, if their site is offering all 4 already, they will be randomly assigned to each of them, to one of them. They cannot select, but I just want to remind everyone that the science behind each of them is just as good. And again, the webinar series explains why each of them was selected and why they're all sort of at the same level in terms of promise for ALS treatments.
Thank you. There's a question about whether we can share our intro video on the platform trial with Everything ALS social media.
Yes, I believe so. It's publicly available. It's on YouTube as well as our website.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a question, and I'm happy maybe to answer this one. It's perhaps I was mistaken, but it was my understanding that the results of the first 3 clinical trials will be announced sometime in 2021. Given that the trials must be completed before results are announced, the trials are 6 months in length, and enrollment is at 50%, is it still feasible to complete the trials in 2021? Can you clarify? Yeah, so we won't really know the answer to that until enrollment is done. So if, let's say, enrollment finishes in the next 2 months, then yes, we would be able to have the results in 2021. So we looked at the results after the last person enrolled in the first 3 regimens finishes 6 months of follow-up. So the faster a trial enrolls, the sooner you get the results. And in particular, the platform trial, as we'll have results for 3 drugs at the same time, not 1, and the 4th one will be shortly afterwards. So we're hopeful. COVID has made it challenging for people to come to centers to be in trials and for the centers, but we now have almost all of our sites enrolling, and there's great interest, and we also are hopefully getting out of the pandemic. So I am hopeful that we'll still be getting results in 2021. But it all depends on when the last person enrolls for the first 3. There's a question about whether foreign patients can participate in the trial.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no limitation in that respect. We do ask, it is a requirement for patients to be able to access one of the trial sites. So whether the participant lives in the US or can access on a frequent basis the trial site, absolutely international participants can participate.
It's a very nice comment about Catherine, so I do want to read that. Catherine has provided tremendous help and lots of information, so thank you, Catherine. And please, people, reach out to Catherine and Allison. That have been enormously helpful. So there's a question about if people with ALS need to swallow pills to be in the platform trial, will this ever change to include ability to do tube feeds? Maybe, Sabrina, if you want to answer that question, maybe talk about when we might be able to change the inclusion criteria.
Yeah, now this is a great question. So at screening, at this time, we require participants to be able to swallow, and in the future, I mean, this could change, but the timing of changes like that will be after a set of regimens has been completed, because we need to maintain sort of the same target population for the regimens that are ongoing. Now, in the future, as new regimens come on board, we might be able to change that again in between regimens. So the beauty of the platform trial is that it can adapt, and based on the results of the sort of the first iteration, we will be able to continue to adapt and make progress, hopefully in that direction as well.
Our design team is ready to start to talk about that. And again, a lot can happen after we're done with enrolling for the first regimens. So thank you. If participation is only at 50%, how can we have results in a few months? Don't we have to have full enrollment and wait for the whole cohort to finish? So yes, we have to wait for the first, all the participants in the first 3 regimens to finish 6 months. And again, the timing is going to depend on enrollment in the next couple months. But enrollment in trials usually starts out slow and then picks up. So for example, in July when we started with 1 site open, and then the second site, and then 5, 10, as you guys have seen, it keeps growing. And now we're at almost all 54 sites. So the enrollment rate is much faster now than it was, for example, in July.
Yeah, I've heard people describe that phenomenon in clinical trials as a hockey stick phenomenon, which is very typical because sites don't, it's also like it starts and then it goes up because as sites come on board.
So there's a question about why do we have a requirement for less than 36 months from onset?
Yeah, I can start and then feel free to weigh in. So essentially, the goal of the trial is to be able to provide answers as fast, as rapidly as possible. In other words, to be able to tell if the drugs that we are testing are effective for all people with ALS or not. In order to have a relatively contained and relatively fast trial, we need to have participants with certain characteristics. And actually, we did put a lot of thought and discussion into the best balance or what boundaries we had to include. And this was done in collaboration with industry partners and the patient community and our patient advisory committee as well. So essentially, the balance here is that with a 36-month screening period threshold, we're able to have enough statistical power, to see the treatment effect, if there is one, within a certain period of time. If we were to expand the criteria, then, for example, if we were to enroll people who have had ALS for 5 years, for example, or for 10 years, then by definition, we would enroll people that have had slower progression. And so it would take longer times for us to answer the scientific question. I do want to point out that once we have the answer, that will be applicable to everyone. So again, it's a balance between having answers faster and allowing access.
There's a question that maybe I'll take is asking if there's a collaboration between the center and this group called M&D Smart in Scotland that's also doing an adaptive trial. And so absolutely, yes. For those of you who know us, we're all about collaboration and open sharing and accelerating progress. So when we were planning the HEALEY Platform Trial, we organized a meeting with the M&D Smart people and also the TriCals group in Europe so that we could share what we were doing because each group is approaching platform trials slightly differently. And so we shared what we're doing, which drugs we're approaching, because what we want to do is keep that open dialogue and we want to all be testing different treatments so that we're getting multiple answers. The MND SMART trial is in Scotland and UK, and they're taking a different approach. They're repurposing old medicines, so medicines on the market for different reasons, and they're actually have almost no exclusion criteria. It's for the population, so it's a different approach, and we're doing new molecules, new drugs, and again, anyway, in the end, we'll have the results of their drugs and the results of ours, and we're openly talking about that. So there's a question about whether any of the patients will require a spinal tap.
So it's not a requirement. We do collect spinal taps and CSF fluid on a voluntary basis, so it's optional. And so again, if somebody wants to volunteer for the extra procedure, absolutely, that really helps us with biomarker work, but it's not required to participate in the trial.
Question is if any of the current studies allow people with PLS.
Not at this time. I do have a personal interest in PLS, and I'm certainly committed to working on PLS. We have a few studies at this time in PLS that are not part of the platform. Hopefully, with the progress that we make in those studies, such as developing better outcome measures that are specific to PLS, better biomarkers that are specific to PLS, hopefully we will be able to also have clinical trials for PLS. But again, because it's a different population, it's not included in the platform trial. I think there's still a little bit of work to do on PLS to really define the best outcome measures and biomarkers for that particular population.
There's a question about what we think is a limiting factor for increasing the enrollment rate.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, there's a few factors. I mean, I think that the number one really they've been facing so far, obviously, is COVID, because we have had, we were hoping to add more sites initially, but many sites were actually closed. I mean, we could not. It was prohibited to do research at those sites. Many sites initially, but even now, have some restrictions on some maneuvers, such as collection of respiratory measures. So we had a series of logistical, and regulatory and administrative problems related to COVID, and those actually continue even in terms of supply chain challenges, etc. So I think that's the number one constraint. And then I think that we are entering with this trial, we're really sort of jump starting a new era. I think in ALS clinical trials, where we really have more options, more sites, more opportunities for people with ALS, and therefore there is tremendous interest, which we're incredibly grateful for. And now we need to increase capacity at the sites. Even so, when the pandemic is over, we hope, we're already working on hiring and really expanding capacity so that when the pandemic restrictions are lifted, we can include more people.
Thank you. There's a question about someone who was diagnosed more than 10 years ago and lives in Peru, and whether they would be eligible.
Yeah, so I think that, as you point out, being diagnosed 10 years ago points to a slow progression of the disease, which means that over a 6-month period, which is the period of the trial, we are unlikely to see any change. That's why we have criteria that allow us to enroll people who are predicted to have a certain progression rate to be able to tell if the drugs work within the 6-month period, which is the period of the trial, the randomized period. So again, unfortunately, for people who have a very slow progression, it's not possible to be in the trial, again, for the statistical reasons I said earlier, because we want to do the trial rapidly so that then we can give answers to everyone with ALS. And again, if the drugs were to be positive and go to market, my expectation is that they will be available for everyone, even for the slow progressors.
Kind of a related question, maybe this is a good time to kind of give an update on our expanded access program, was if people are not eligible for the trial for whatever reason, are there other options in particular around expanded access to these same treatments?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So that's our other commitment, to continue to increase access for people with ALS who do not qualify for the actual formal trial. And so that's why we partnered with different companies and IMALS and different groups. And we're really working hard on launching a multi-site expanded access program that is still a trial, so still requires FDA oversight, IRB approval, etc. we're now, I think, really close to finishing sort of preparations for the first couple expanded access programs that will be rolled out at a small number of sites initially, but again, with the goal of increasing the type of offering over time.
Maybe I'll answer the next one. There's a question of whether there's any early indications that the trial drugs are more effective than Radicava. So two things I want to answer. One is in the HEALEY platform trial, people can be on Radicava or Riluzole or anything that's considered standard of care. So in a way, we're testing these new drugs in the setting of people already taking those drugs. Of course, we all want things that are going to be additive and even more effective. In the trial, you're not allowed to look at the efficacy data until the trial is done. And otherwise you invalidate the whole study, and nobody wants to do that because that means we won't be able to use the data. So we don't have the efficacy result. There is a data safety monitoring board that's always looking for safety throughout, but we're really not going to know whether these drugs are efficacious until enrollment is finished and the last person finishes 6 months from there. So I wish I had the answer sooner, but we have to wait until that. But again, the platform trial still speeds a whole process up by the sharing of the placebos and getting 3 answers instead of 1 at the end of that first group. There's a question about somebody whose son is in the trial. He fortunately has a slow progression. Is there someone at the clinics that could counsel him about going into open label extension or not? And Sabrina, maybe
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, as a site investigator myself, I oftentimes discuss the same question with our patients. We started, at MGH, we started enrolling a few months ago, and now we have quite a few people who are already on open label extension. So we had that exact conversation. And I think that, really the best person to counsel, your son or a participant would be the treating physician or the investigator at that site where the trial is taking place. Because really it's within that relationship that one can make the best decision in terms of going into open label extension or maybe choosing to re-enter the platform trial and re-randomize.
I'd add that the reason for the open label extension is multiple fold, but the main one was to give options to people who are in the trial. We've heard loud and clear from the people that we care for and the ALS community that this is really a requirement. So I'm really glad that we made it a requirement. No company can work with us if they don't provide it. And the science is still as good as it was 6 months ago. So we're happy to be able to provide that. The other thing we can learn is longer term safety and also see if efficacy grows with time. So there's a lot of science you can learn from it too. But the primary goal was just to give people access and an option. There's a question about supplements and why curcumin is exclusionary.
Yeah, so we are, like the vast majority, if not all ALS trials, we need to exclude other compounds, whether they are proprietary compounds or supplements that are currently being tested in other trials. As you may know, curcumin is being tested formally in a clinical trial at Duke University. And so we had a clear policy. And the reason for that is because, if we were to include multiple investigational products at the same time, then it would confound the results. We would not be able to answer the scientific question that we want to answer in this trial, which is, does this particular drug works? And if we have imbalances in uses of supplements that are being tested in other trials, that would confound the answer and would prevent us from answering the question.
So we have 11 questions. This is so great, left in 5 minutes. So we're going to be super fast on our answers, or we'll go a little late. So if AMX 035 is approved in Canada, would it be eligible for standard of care for platform participants?
So our philosophy is that if a drug is being approved in the region where the trial is taking place, that will become standard of care in that particular region. So when AMX 35 or any other drug gets approved for ALS in the United States, that will become the standard of care here, and therefore it will be allowed. It will be allowed, just like Riluzole and edaravone.
Can you please review the primary outcome measures for the trial?
Yes, we're looking at changes in function as measured by a questionnaire that's called the ALS Functional Rating Scale. You may have seen it in the clinic, the ALS FRSR. We're also looking at other measures of function, such as respiratory function, muscle strength, and we're also collecting a variety of biomarkers and exploratory measures to be able to add to our understanding of the drug, but also to contribute to ALS science, which I think is another very important goal of the trial. We're going to be sharing all this information to improve other projects, other trials, and again, continue to learn more about ALS.
So there's, I might take these two questions. So the question is, if we're at 50% enrollment, is that for the 3 drugs or 4? And do we have to finish the 4th to get the results for the first 3? So the 50% is for the first 3 because they all start at the same time. And we do not have to wait for the 4th one to finish to get the results for the first 3. So we'll first report on the first 3, but the 4th one's going to come shortly afterwards because we're going to be able to use, again, the placebo data from the first 3 for the analysis for the 4th one as well. So we're really going to have 4 results in a very quick time. So that again is what the beauty of the platform trial. If any of the products in the platform trial show efficacy, what is the timeline for access of that product to all people with ALS?
Yeah, that will depend on the results, the actual results, if they are, for example, borderline or very positive, as well as the resulting conversations between the company and the FDA, and obviously we participate in that as well. So depending on the results, again, there might be different paths for that.
Will participants be notified of the results of the study? And if so, how and when? Maybe I'll answer that.
Yeah,
one.
sure.
So absolutely. So what we typically do is when we know the results, we arrange 3 types of webinars. One is for the actual participants so that they can hear it directly. The other is for the entire community. And the third communication is obviously a press release, which is required, by the companies, by a security exchange. But we try to do that all in like a very short amount of time so we get the word out quickly. Could a platform trial participant be on butanol and tech?
No, because that's still considered experimental at this time.
Are there any overnight stays?
No overnight stays in the hospital.
And how many visits in this trial, in the double blind?
So in the double blind, it's I believe it's 6 to 7 in-person visits. Of note, there is flexibility to do some of those, not all, but some of those via telemedicine if needed because of the pandemic. But again, we encourage people to come in person if possible because that's our only way to get biomarkers and additional information.
And someone wanted to confirm open label starts after the completion of the trial. Do you want to explain exactly?
Yes, so from a participant perspective, the open label starts after that particular person, that person finishes the 6 months of randomized period. So obviously that means that we have a few people who already, started first last year and already completed their own 6-month randomized period, and they're now on open label. But for people who are we're just starting now, they will have to complete their own 6 months of randomized, 6-month randomized period before they are eligible for their own open label extension.
What if a drug only works in a subset of patients? How would you identify that, and would it impact regulatory approval?
That's a great question. That's exactly why we're doing biomarker collection and collection of a whole series of exploratory measures using smartphones, using different measures in the clinic. And when we have a whole exploratory plan to look at things like that, we could learn that maybe only certain subsets are responding to the drug. And depending on the specific results, that will impact the availability of the drug.
And I know we got a question in advance. I want to make sure we answer it. I sent it to Catherine. Is it possible for a drug to work in a biomarker and not work clinically?
That's a great question. So I think things can go in both directions in a way, right? Because we are collecting both, and both are important for different reasons. Now, in a phase 3 trial, in a pivotal trial, what we're trying to do is to see if a specific drug is changing quality of life, function, and survival of the participants. So that's the goal. So that's what the regulators base their approval on, and that's also what's clinically meaningful for patients. Is their function, is their life expectancy or quality of life better on that drug? Now, in earlier stages of development, so for example, in phase 1 to 2 trials, or in general, when we are trying to learn more about the drug or about the disease, biomarkers are also incredibly important because they teach us about target engagement, about the ability of the drug to have an effect on the biological processes. And the two things can go hand in hand. For some biomarkers, they may be representative of the clinical status or function or etc. For other biomarkers, they may not. So it's not, they can be connected or not, depending on the specific biomarker and situation.
So I think we'll do two last questions. And one I want to ask either Allison or Catherine, if you can answer this, or both. How are we getting neurologists to know about these clinical trials? Since ALS is so rare, I wonder how many potential participants aren't getting into a trial within a 36-month cutoff. How can PALS help get the word out?
So I feel like there was a little bit of the beginning there that I don't want to get confused. So I think part of it is, I'll say one of the recommendations I make when talking to patients is that if clinical care is established at a center where research is ongoing, neurologists tend to be in the know. So for example, at Mass General, the neurologists working on the team here, everyone kind of knows about the ongoing trials. So they're able, within their own clinical population, to, try to match patients with a trial or spotlight, possible good candidates. But then other than that, I think, we really rely on these webinars and, as someone earlier had mentioned, sharing that video of that Something New is Here video on social media, and just raising awareness that the trial exists and is accessible nationwide. And then knowing those criteria are available online to check for whether somebody might meet the qualifications as well.
Thank you. And thank you for the offer. That helps spread the word. Are any drugs in the trials or possibly being considered in the future to reverse the symptoms?
Well, I would say that obviously that's everyone's goal. And when we do preclinical science, when we check these drugs in the lab, their efficacy is tested on so-called preclinical models. So that can be cell cultures, can be stem cells, it can be animal models. And so again, you don't really know what the effect will be until you really go into people. We only put into people drugs that are promising at the lab level, obviously, but then really it's not until you measure that in people that you really know what the effect in a living individual will be. Definitely stopping or reversing the disease is the goal. We cannot predict until we do the trial.
Thank you. And last two questions. I know I said two questions, right? But these will be the real last two. One is whether we knew anything about the new 9 thing, and I'm happy to answer that one. Hande is a close friend and a wonderful scientist from Northwestern. This is a drug that in the lab has helped clear something called TDP-43 in upper motor neurons. So she's found a drug that, at least in the lab, looks like it might be helpful for the upper motor neuron part of the illness. For example, that's what people with PLS have, also people with ALS. It's preclinical, meaning it's not ready for people. That has to go through animal safety studies, but it's great science, and hopefully that will move forward at warp speed. And I use the word warp because the hardest question here was, have there been any research methodologies used in Operation Warp Speed that could be carried over to ALS treatment research for shorter time to market possibilities?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know, Merit, if you want to add to that, but I would say that part of the success of the Operation Warp Speed is that there was an incredible amount of funding and use of resources for that. In fact, that resources were diverted from other fields or other studies to fund and make that specific operation possible. So I would say the more funding, the more awareness, and the more we can devote resources to ALS, that's when really we see speed happening. Having said that, there's been also some regulatory kind of changes and specific techniques and use of telemedicine or things like that we are certainly incorporating. But I think really the big theme here is resources and funding.
Yeah, it shows what's possible when you have that. So just a quick update we got from Lisa that Hande who's the woman at in Northwestern who did the phenomenal new 9 work. She's going to be presenting April 7th on everything ALS to share her discoveries. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank
See
you.
next week, hopefully.
Thank you. Bye.